Happy birthday, my father said with a tight smile, then handed me an envelope I'll never forget. It wasn't wrapped. No bow, no warmth. Just a thin white envelope, damp with rain and thick with betrayal. My name is Lauren Hale, and on the day I turned 32, I was evicted from the house I had been silently saving for 5 years. I lit the candles on my birthday cake alone. Lemon, my favorite. And 30 minutes later, I was told to leave what I called home. By my own father. Not because I failed. Not because I couldn't afford it. But because they thought I wouldn't fight back. They thought I was just a tenant. What they didn't know? I held the lien. I held the proof. I held the receipts. Before I show you how I froze the sale of the house they tried to sell behind my back. Before I tell you what my mother left behind in a blue envelope, hidden for years. Let me ask you this. Have you ever been erased by the people you protected? Have you ever had to prove you belonged with paper instead of blood? Tell me in the comments. And subscribe if you've ever been forced to make them remember who you are. It wasn't wrapped. There was no card. Just a thin white envelope. Creased, impersonal, almost clinical. I hadn't even finished saying hello when he thrust it into my hands like it might burn him if he held on any longer. Rain trickled down the edge of his overcoat, soaking into the collar. Behind him, Marjorie stood with a smug expression that made my skin crawl. She didn't say anything, just clasped her leather clutch like a queen waiting for the peasants to bow. I didn't know you two were coming, I said, stepping aside instinctively, even though I didn't want them inside. My apartment was small, modest, but it was mine. And I had just finished lighting the candles on the sad little lemon cake I'd picked up from the bakery near the L station. Douglas Hale didn't reply. He walked in like he still had a claim to the place, dripping rainwater onto my rug. Marjorie followed, careful not to let her heels touch the wet edges. I closed the door behind them, trying not to let the nausea rise in my throat. You could have called, I said. Or texted, like Emily did. We wanted to deliver this in person, he replied, nodding at the envelope now in my trembling hand. I opened it without sitting down. My breath caught halfway through the first line. Notice to vacate premises. The words leapt off the page like an accusation. You're evicting me? I choked out. From my own house? Douglas's mouth twitched. It's a technicality, Lauren. The property's in my name. But I've been paying the mortgage, I said, my voice rising before I could control it. Every month for the last 5 years. You covered some months, Marjorie interjected sweetly, finally breaking her silence. But it's not sustainable, Lauren. You're wasting your potential holdup in this place. It's time we made better use of the asset. Better use? I repeated. There's already an interested buyer, she added, inspecting her manicure. We're just formalizing the process. Nothing personal. I wanted to scream, to break something, but instead I stood frozen, staring at the signature at the bottom of the page. Douglas W. Hale. My father. He looked at me then, not like a man who loved his daughter, more like someone confirming a business transaction. Marjorie smiled faintly, victorious. You have 30 days, he said. Then they left. The moment the door shut, I didn't cry. Not immediately. Instead, I walked over to my desk, turned on my laptop with fingers still damp from the envelope, and opened Zillow. I typed in my address. There it was. 2419 West Emerald Avenue, Unit B. My unit. The listing was live. It had been uploaded 4 days ago. The main photo was of the living room, the pillows I'd sewn, the light fixture I installed myself, and then the photo that made my chest seize, the front porch. The one I'd spent all of last summer rebuilding, nail by nail, white lattice work, fresh coats of paint, the planter box with faded lavender now wilted in the cold. So it hadn't been a mistake. Last week, when I saw a blurry photo of the porch on a random housing site, I told myself it was a glitch. Or maybe someone had taken inspiration from my design. Now I knew better. My phone buzzed. A text from Emily. Wait, weren't you the one paying the mortgage? I stared at the screen, the words echoing inside me like a bell tolling the end of something sacred. I should have seen this coming. The subtle signs, the silence, the way Marjorie always called it, Douglas's property. The way my father deferred to her when I asked about future repairs. And yet, I kept believing that contributing meant belonging. Foolish, I thought. So foolish. I clicked on the listing photo, zoomed in slowly. The porch rail still had the tiny heart-shaped burn mark I never bothered to sand out. A stupid accident from a 4th of July sparkler. A memory. My memory. They were selling it like it was theirs. I looked around at the apartment. My apartment, for the last 5 years. Every frame on the wall, every mug in the cupboard, every paycheck sacrificed to keep this roof over my head. To give them one less thing to worry about. To prove I was capable. Worthy. A laugh escaped me. Dry, bitter, almost feral. I had given them everything they asked for. And now they were taking everything I had left. I lowered the laptop lid slowly and stared at my reflection in the black screen. My jaw was clenched. My hands had stopped shaking. They thought they'd won. That they could hand me an eviction notice on my birthday and I'd go quietly. Not this time. She whispers to herself, "They think they own it? Let's see how long that lasts." They gambled with our house, and I was the one who paid the price in silence. I stood by the window as the storm outside shifted to a soft, bitter drizzle. My phone sat on the coffee table, the eviction notice still open beside it. I hadn't moved in hours. The candles on the birthday cake had long since melted into crooked wax puddles, untouched. Not because I wasn't hungry, but because something deeper than hunger had taken root. Something colder. I tapped open my voicemail. There it was. Marjorie's voice. Smug as always. "We need to sell fast, Douglas. Before she knows what's happening. It'll be cleaner that way." Before I know? The breath caught in my throat again, but this time it wasn't from shock. It was something darker, deeper. A memory surfaced, one I'd buried for months. October 2023. That house wasn't theirs to sell. Not anymore. I closed my eyes and suddenly I was back in the family home. The office, cluttered with unopened bills, sticky notes, and a cracked mug that said "Number 1 Dad." It was a Saturday. I remember because I canceled brunch with friends to be there. Douglas sat behind the desk, face pale, fingers trembling around a pen. The bank had called him that morning. Final warning. Foreclosure scheduled. The third refinancing had failed, and the payments hadn't been made in 3 months. Marjorie wasn't worried. She stood by the window scrolling on her phone, sipping a smoothie, acting like everything was fine. "It's a temporary glitch," she'd said. "They always give extensions." Douglas had looked at me then. Really looked. Not with pride. Not even guilt. Just desperation. Like I was the last chip he could play before the house folded into someone else's hands. "I need your help," he'd said. The words were sour in his mouth, but I understood. That house wasn't just drywall and plumbing. It was our history, our family. My mother's lavender wallpaper in the upstairs hallway. Emily's name carved into the closet door. My porch? My porch. So I made the calls, found a lawyer, met with the bank. I signed papers behind closed doors, leveraged my credit, and took over the mortgage under a lien arrangement. Douglas wouldn't lose the house. Not publicly, anyway. On paper, he'd still be the owner. But the debt? The payments? All mine. I didn't tell Emily. I didn't even tell my friends. I told myself I was preserving family pride. That maybe, just maybe, they'd appreciate the sacrifice in time. But they didn't. Back in the present, I opened my documents folder. The lien agreement was still there, downloaded in black and white. Primary lien holder, Lauren Hale. My signature, dated October 12th, 2023. They couldn't sell without me. That was the law. I pulled up Renee Carter's number from my contacts. She'd been the one who helped me through the paperwork last fall. Smart. Tough. Unapologetic. She answered on the second ring. Lauren, I was just thinking about you. That's either a coincidence or you've been reading Zillow, I said flatly. A pause. Then, I saw the listing. You didn't approve this, right? Not even close. They handed me an eviction notice on my birthday. I could hear the click of her keyboard. You're the lien holder. If they're trying to sell without your consent, that's fraud. I can file an injunction first thing tomorrow. Will that stop them? Her tone sharpened. If they try to sell it, you have the right to freeze the process. You own the debt. They can't ignore you. I let those words sink in. Finally, I wasn't powerless. My phone buzzed again. A message from Emily. Marjorie told Aunt Gwen that you were just a tenant. Is that true? Tenant. I almost laughed. No, I wasn't a tenant. I was the glue. The one who kept the house upright while they played games with ownership like it was Monopoly. Not anymore. I walked to the mirror near my entryway. My reflection looked unfamiliar. Still me, but steelier now. Less soft, more certain. I thought about every time I'd been talked over, cut out, erased. Lauren, then let's make sure they don't forget me this time. If they wanted war over dinner, I'd bring the contract and the receipts. The morning sun cut sharp angles through my blinds, carving golden streaks across the eviction notice still taped to the fridge. I left it there on purpose. Let it glare at me while I brewed my coffee. Like a daily dare. I sipped from the chipped mug that read, Best Daughter, then slipped the papers I printed last night into a manila folder. Not just papers. Proof. Renee had sent over everything. The signed lien agreement, bank receipts, even screenshots of my payments. The house wasn't theirs to toss around like poker chips at one of Marjorie's game nights. It was tethered to me. By law, by sacrifice, and by blood. I stepped into the street just as a gust of wind flipped my coat collar. Chicago was always dramatic in April. Half spring, half vendetta. I liked that. It matched my mood. The cafe on Halstead was almost empty. Renee sat by the window, her laptop open, a legal pad covered in shorthand scribbles. She barely looked up before speaking. Didn't sleep, did you? I shook my head. Didn't want to. I had too much to remember. She slid a document toward me. This is the notice of intent to contest the sale. You'll need to mail it certified today. I flipped through it. Every word had teeth. Every paragraph carried the weight of what they tried to steal. And this? I tapped the next sheet. Chain of payments. Every transfer from your account. It's bulletproof. A familiar voice tugged me out of the moment. Lauren? I turned. Emily stood at the entrance, her coat half unzipped, hair windblown, eyes wary. I hadn't seen her since Thanksgiving. Not in person. I stood slowly. You came? She hesitated, then walked over. I had to. I saw the listing too, and I found something. We sat. She opened her bag and pulled out a faded envelope. My breath caught. I was cleaning the attic last fall, she said. I found this behind Mom's old photo albums. It's her will. She named you as primary trustee. Dad said it was void because it wasn't filed. But I don't know. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope. The handwriting was undeniably hers. Delicate. Precise. To be opened only if Douglas fails to protect our daughters. The first line burned into me. Did you read it all? I asked. Emily nodded. She wanted the house to go to both of us. Equally. Dad never mentioned that. Of course he didn't. I pressed my fingers to my forehead, trying to steady the swirl. Renee leaned in. Even if it wasn't formally processed, that document has persuasive weight. Especially if it explains her wishes. We could leverage it. Quietly. Back at my apartment, I copied the voicemail Marjorie had left. The one where she casually mentioned the buyer was Brandon's friend from college, and they needed to close quickly. Then I opened a new folder, labeled it Litigation, Hale v. Hale, Pending, and slid everything in. The final piece? The legal notice. I printed 3 copies, signed them, and walked them to the mailbox on the corner. I watched the envelopes disappear into the metal mouth with something close to satisfaction. Back inside, I opened a note on my phone and typed a single line. If they want to use my silence as a weapon, then I'll make my voice the law. Later that night, as I curled up on the couch, Emily texted me. Dad's coming over. Marjorie said something about dinner. Be ready. A few seconds later, another message popped up on my screen. Not from Emily. This one from Marjorie, mistakenly sent to me instead of Douglas. Dinner tomorrow? She won't see it coming. Oh, I'd see it coming. I just wouldn't flinch. They invited me to dinner thinking I'd swallow their lies with dessert. I brought documents instead. The Hale family dining room hadn't changed in years. Still overlit, still stiff with inherited furniture, still pretending we were a family worth photographing. Crystal glasses lined up like sentries. China plates sat on linen napkins folded too sharply. Everything screamed civility. It was perfect for war. Marjorie greeted me at the door in a silk blouse and a smirk. Lauren, she said, voice honeyed with practiced hospitality. You look prepared. I am, I replied, stepping past her, my heels echoing on the hardwood floor. I carried no gift, just a leather folio tucked beneath my arm, my own offering. Douglas stood by the fireplace, drink in hand, nodding stiffly. Brandon hovered awkwardly by the sideboard, pouring wine like he wished he were anywhere else. Emily sat at the far end of the table, her eyes flitting between us like a cautious audience member before the curtain rises. We ate through salad and polite lies. Marjorie led the small talk like a conductor. Brandon just got a promotion. Commercial real estate's booming again. I let her talk. I let them all pretend. Let the performance tighten its grip. Main course arrived. The roast smelled perfect. So did the timing. Marjorie set down her fork and dabbed her mouth. We should probably discuss tomorrow's closing, Douglas. Brandon's friend is eager to finalize, and it'll be cleaner if we clear out any complications tonight. She said it like a toast. Brandon froze, glancing at his plate. Emily blinked hard. I reached down, opened the folio, and placed it in the center of the table. A soft thud. Silence. What's this? Marjorie asked, her voice still syrupy, but her posture sharp. I looked at Douglas. You may want to read those out loud. He hesitated, flipping through the documents. His brow furrowed deeper with each page. The lien transfer agreement, the certified mail receipt, the notice of intent to freeze sale, the ledger of my payments, each entry more damning than the last. He didn't speak. Brandon leaned in, scanning over his shoulder. Wait, you never told me she owned the lien? Marjorie snorted. Owned the… Lauren, come on. You never wanted the house. You didn't even live there anymore. I didn't save that house for nostalgia, I said, my voice calm but pointed. I saved it because you were reckless, and I knew someday you'd try to pretend I never existed. Douglas opened his mouth, then closed it again. His face, usually so hard to read, cracked with something resembling shame. Marjorie, on the other hand, laughed. This is ridiculous. You think you can just block the sale? Honey, that house has been in Douglas's name for years. I know. I cut in. Which is why you both should have read the fine print when I paid off your 3rd refinancing. The lien puts me first in line. You try to sell without my consent? The title gets flagged. The sale stalls. And your precious buyer finds a better offer. Brandon shifted uncomfortably. This is a legal mess. Marjorie snapped. You stay out of this. I turned to Emily, who had been quiet, eyes flicking between pages and faces. She reached into her purse and pulled out the envelope again. The one with our mother's handwriting. "I have something else you should see," Emily said, sliding it toward me. "It's about Mom." The room went still. Even Marjorie didn't speak. Douglas's hands gripped the edge of the table. I looked down at the envelope. The paper was thinner than I remembered, more fragile. But the moment? Sharp as ever. The lies they fed me all these years, I finally made them choke on one truth at a time. It was raining again, like it had forgotten how to stop. I didn't mind. The sound helped me think, kept me grounded. I sat on the edge of the couch, flipping through the notarized freeze documents one last time when the doorbell rang. I didn't move at first. My gut already knew who it was. When I opened the door, Douglas stood there. No umbrella. Just his coat dripping, his shoes soaked, and an expression that couldn't decide between regret and resignation. "Can we talk?" he asked. I let him in, wordlessly. He didn't deserve warmth, but he'd earned a seat. Barely. He took in the room, the cluttered coffee table, the photo of me and Mom tucked behind the candle, the unopened wine bottle that had been meant for my birthday. "I came to apologize," he began, voice low. "For everything. The sale. The notice. I let Marjorie push too hard. I didn't see what she was turning me into." I raised an eyebrow. "Number you saw. You just didn't flinch." He sank into the armchair across from me, rubbing his hands together like he needed something to hold. "You were always too smart for your own good." "You say that like it's a flaw." "I don't. Not anymore." Before I could reply, the door clicked again. Emily stepped in, her coat half-buttoned, an envelope clutched in her hand like it might vanish if she let go. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. Douglas straightened. "Emily, you knew I was coming?" She sat beside me. "Number, but I figured you'd show up eventually." She placed the envelope on the table. Pale blue, aged at the corners. In Mom's handwriting it read, "To be opened only if needed." Douglas looked at it like it was radioactive. Where did you get that?" "I found it last fall," Emily said, "behind the sewing chest. I didn't know what it meant until now." My fingers hesitated before opening it. Inside, folded neatly, was a handwritten will, dated 7 months before Mom passed. It named both daughters as heirs, but one name had an asterisk. Mine, majority heir to the house. Douglas paled. "That wasn't filed." "It doesn't matter," I said. "If Marjorie influenced you to ignore it, Renee can argue duress. And even if not, it's clear what Mom wanted." I dialed Renee on speaker. "She wrote it by hand," I told her. "No witness, but clear intent. And the date lines up." Renee's voice crackled through. "In Illinois, holographic wills aren't binding. But if we prove Marjorie's influence skewed the estate direction posthumously, this could still carry persuasive weight in court. Especially paired with the lien." Douglas stared at the will, then at me. His eyes drifted to the bookshelf, where a framed photo of me at 16 smiled back. Me on the porch, hammer in hand, midway through building that deck by myself. "I didn't think it would come to this," he said, almost whispering. I leaned forward, voice steady. "It already did. You just weren't paying attention." We sat in silence. No accusations left to hurl, no masks left to wear. Finally, Douglas sighed. "So what now?" I glanced at Emily. She nodded slightly. "You don't get to erase me," I said. "You don't get to use my silence as consent. The house stays off the market. The lien stands. I'm not asking for gratitude. Just acknowledgement and a boundary." Douglas nodded slowly. He looked like a man coming to terms with the ruins of a fire he started but couldn't control. As he stood to leave, Emily's voice broke the quiet. "If you want closure, there's one more thing Mom left behind. I was evicted on my birthday." 30 days later, I hosted a party in the same house, with a different guest list. The garden had never looked like this before, not even when Mom was alive. The hedges were trimmed, the weeds pulled, String lights draped from the porch beams to the fence, glowing warm against the afternoon sky. Wildflowers lined the walkway. Sunflowers, foxglove, and forget-me-nots. I chose each one on purpose. The rebirth brunch wasn't about revenge. It was about return. I wasn't the girl who cried behind locked doors anymore. I was the woman unlocking them, for people who never slammed them in my face. The living room smelled like citrus and rosemary. Music floated in softly from the garden speakers, and the brunch table, draped in linen, shimmered with glasses of orange juice and cold rosé. I stood by the kitchen window, watching guests arrive. Renee was first, carrying a bottle of red and a folder tucked under her arm, just in case I wanted to review final paperwork. She didn't even mention the case, just hugged me and said, "You made it yours again." My former architecture professor, Mr. Sheffield, showed up next. He took in the repainted porch and whistled. "You always did understand space better than anyone." Then came Emily, beaming in a blue dress that matched the sky. She brought cinnamon scones, still warm. As she hugged me, she whispered, "Mom would have loved this." I nodded, swallowing the sudden lump in my throat. By noon, the backyard was alive with laughter. We toasted, not to endings, but to something that felt much older. Something like truth. Emily gave a short speech, hands trembling only slightly as she read a few lines Mom had once written in her garden journal. "A home isn't brick or equity. It's the space we build with memory and keep with love." Applause rippled gently through the garden. Renee raised her glass. "To Lauren and the roots she planted, even when the soil wasn't kind." I smiled. I felt it, finally. Not the sting of old wounds, not the ache of injustice. Just sunlight and the weightless joy of being right where I was supposed to be. That's when I saw him. Douglas stood quietly at the gate. No one noticed him at first. He wasn't dressed for brunch. Just slacks, a sweater, and the same hollowed-out expression I remembered from the living room weeks ago. He approached slowly. Not a man trying to reclaim space, but one hoping not to disturb it. "I didn't come for a seat," he said. "Just to give you this." He held out an envelope. The edges were worn, the ink faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Mom's. I stared at it for a long second before taking it. He nodded once, then turned and left. No grand gesture, no plea. I stepped into the sunroom, away from the clatter of cutlery and glass. Inside the envelope was a letter dated March 14th, 2019. The ink trembled, just slightly. "Lauren, if you're reading this, then something has broken. And I hope you remember one thing. You are not the broken one. I see how you listen, how you love without expecting, how you protect people who forget to protect you back. Someday, you'll own your voice. And when you do, use it not to shout, but to build. Plant your roots where you've seen the most. Even if it was pain, that's where your strongest branches will grow. With all my love, Mom." I pressed the letter back into its envelope, hands calm. I walked outside, the sun slipping lower now, golden light dancing on the porch rail. Everyone turned as I stepped forward. I smiled, not for show, but because it rose naturally, like something unburied. Let's make this home what it should have always been. The porch light flickered softly as the last of the guests said their goodbyes. Dishes were rinsed, glasses half full, laughter still lingering in corners of the house that once echoed with silence. I stood by the doorway for a long while, listening, not to any voice in particular, but to the stillness that follows clarity. A month ago, I was handed an eviction notice in the same house. Today, I handed myself back the key. No dramatics, no vengeance, just a quiet, deliberate act of taking up space I was once told I didn't deserve. I thought I'd feel rage, or at least some raw satisfaction. But what settled in my chest wasn't heat. It was something steadier. I had done what they never expected. I stood my ground without screaming, without throwing punches. I made sure every document, every word, Every fact lined up so precisely that no one could deny what was already mine. Emily and I cleaned up the brunch table together, laughing about how Mr. Sheffield had spilled juice on his shirt during her speech. She looked different lately. Brighter. Not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because some unseen weight between us had lifted. I think she knew, Emily whispered at one point, referring to Mom. About all of this. That's why she left that letter. Why she made copies of the will. She knew someone would try to rewrite the story. I didn't reply right away. I just nodded and took one last glance at the envelope Douglas had brought. I hadn't read it again. I didn't need to. Her voice, Mom's, was already etched somewhere deeper than memory. That night, when the lights dimmed and the world quieted, I sat on the front steps barefoot, wine glass in hand, and watched the moonlight land on the wood I had stained last summer. The same wood I had paid for. The same wood they'd tried to erase. I didn't need them to apologize anymore. I didn't even need them to understand. What I needed, what I had finally given myself, was the permission to stop asking for approval. They could twist timelines, shift stories, sign over deeds behind my back. But the truth had a strange way of staying visible, like knots in wood grain, no matter how many coats of paint you put over it. And now, the rest of the house would carry only the truth I chose to keep. She had once been written out of the story. Now she owned the pen. Her journey wasn't paved with spectacle, but with quiet acts of courage. A signature on a blocked sale, a recorded voicemail played at the right time, a brunch hosted in defiance. One by one, the walls of deception crumbled. Not because she shouted louder, but because her facts stood firmer. Lauren Hale didn't win by fighting their way. She won by walking away from the version of herself they had shaped and choosing her own. Sometimes, justice doesn't arrive with gavel strikes or courtroom applause. It arrives as the quiet sound of a lock clicking from the inside, and a woman opening the door not to let others in, but to finally step out as herself. Like the final note of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but once heard, it lingers. And in the house they tried to steal from her, she left behind no rage, only roots. They handed me an eviction notice on my birthday. 30 days later, I held the keys, not just to the house, but to the truth. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the documents. I didn't ask to be included. I made it impossible to be ignored. If you've ever been pushed out of something you built, if you've ever had to remind people that silence is not surrender, share your story in the comments. Like this video if you've ever reclaimed what was yours, without revenge, just resolve. And subscribe for more stories about quiet power, true justice, and women who won't be written out.